Welcome to Kentucky's Secret Gardens. I'm Tavia Cathcart Brown, and I've been passionate about plants and gardening since I was a little girl. In this show, you'll meet other Kentuckians who share this passion. We'll visit a variety of fascinating private gardens across the state and learn why and how they were created. Every garden is as unique as the interests and aspirations of its owners. Kentucky's secret gardens are found on large country estates and in tiny backyards in the city. They're filled with beautiful views, inspiring ideas, and plenty of surprises. Please join me as we take a look at what's beyond the garden gate. My very first memory was when I was about 2 years old and I was crawling in my grandmother's zinnia garden. And my first love affair was with flowers. My husband and I designed our garden to be a paradise for butterflies, birds, and bees. And it's a secret garden getaway for us. My garden is located on a farm in Louisville. It serves as a source of joy for my husband and for me. It engages us with nature in a hands-on way. It serves pollinators, such as bees and monarch butterflies and birds, which really need help right now. And in fact, it's a certified monarch way station. The front garden is really just to soften the front of the house. And it's sunny, so we get to put lots of our sunny plants out there. The backyard is more of our secret garden. Entices you in, gets you up close and personal with the pollinators, and is really a place to relax. I like to feel enclosed by plants, enclosed within a garden room. That's what makes me happy. When we decided on the different seating areas, we wanted to view the garden from different perspectives. And then one of my favorite spots is our hammock. The hammock is shady. There's a wishbone branch right above when I look up, and I always make wishes on it, and it looks literally like a wishbone. And it's also a great spot because it's near the hostas and the heucheras. The birds like to come visit if you're quiet. It's a very restful spot. Art has a way of just adding surprises to the garden. We like art that has been done by maybe somebody who's not trained as an artist, but who really has their own vision. We have art that might flow with the wind, with the breeze. Other art people have given us, a little ceramic fox or something. We might tuck it under a flower so that only we know it's there, but when we see it, it makes us think of the person who gave it to us. We have at one time up to 14 different bird feeders and usually around half a dozen bird houses. We adore birds. Birds are colorful, they're playful, they have really funny personalities. The reason that I picked the flowers I did for the garden really has to do with their beauty. It has to do with their colors, when they flower. I love things to flower year-round. It has to do with the textures of the leaves. But really at the heart of it is, are they beautiful? Do they have beautiful flowers? When a gardener chooses a plant, the number one thing to look at is, will this grow in my zone? Every area has a zone. Generally in Kentucky, we're zoned in 6 or 7. Some winters are colder than others, and some summers are hotter than others. Plant plants for zone 6 and you'll be safe. Choose a plant that will grow in shade or sun, dry or moist areas, depending on what you need in your garden. Right plant, right place. Choose one that speaks to you in some way. Use your creativity and imagine what you want your garden to look like. And then take a chance. You can always move a plant. You can always give it away, trade for another plant with another gardener. Our garden is really a perennial garden, and the garden has native spring wildflowers, lots of native shrubs. The good old gardener saying is the first year a plant sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps, which means it takes 3 years for perennials really to strut their stuff and to look beautiful. It's hard because most gardeners are not patient. We really enjoy being in the garden together. But in general, I'd say the lines come down to Matt doing all the hard work, and I get to do the fun, pretty work. We make a good garden team. We usually spend a lot of energy in the spring and the fall when we mulch, and we add new plants, and we prune, and we trim back. In spring, you'll start to see little weeds come up. It's so much easier to dig up the weeds when they're just coming up than to wait for them to get 3 feet tall with deep root systems. So one of the best things to do in spring is to actually get out there, look for your ground ivy and your henbits and different weeds that you know far too well, and dig it up, and it will be gone. I've studied botany in college, but I'd like to say that I'm a self-taught ethnobotanist. There's something incredibly rewarding about growing your own food. If you plant something that you absolutely love, or you absolutely love to cook with, or just smell, then you're always going to want to go outside and look at your plants and be involved with your garden. Kentucky has 5 different species of hibiscus that are native, and they're underplanted in gardens, and they give such a phenomenal show. They flower for anywhere from 2 to 3 months. They're large plants with gigantic flowers, and they're gorgeous. Hibiscus plants are perennials. They're easy to grow. There are some that love moisture and others love dry area. What's neat about the hibiscus flower, too, is in the deep cup of the flower, it's usually a couple of degrees warmer. So it's a spot where you'll find bees and beetles sleeping at night. It's really fun to see, because in the heat of the summer, when so many plants are wilting with the heat and the humidity, the hibiscus plants are just loving it, and they're showing off their flowers, and they become the stars of the garden in the summer. Another favorite in our garden is the foxglove. Our foxgloves love the sun or the shade, so we grow them in both locations. And they're real striking plants. They get rather tall, and they have flowers all the way up the spike. The flowers are spotted in the middle. They attract bumblebees. Now be careful. The genus name for foxglove is digitalis, and it actually is used in heart medicine. So it is poisonous. Just don't eat the plant, but otherwise it is a stunning plant. It can turn a garden into what we call a cottage garden. It looks like a garden that might be in England. It just gives it a wild look, beautiful. If you can grow foxgloves, it will transform your garden. Cardinal flower is a native wildflower, and in its normal habitat it grows along a stream side. It loves moisture, but it does fine even if you ignore it. It's one of my favorite wildflowers that I grow in both the sunny section and also even shade. It grows really well in part shade. My husband and I call our garden Astrobelle's Secret Garden. Astrobelle was the name of my grandmother. It's a tribute to her love of zinnias, and at the same time, my husband loves zinnias, and so did his family. We adore zinnias. We grow them in all different heights and colors, and we never get tired of them. Our main patch of zinnias is all thrown down seed. We'll throw down seed when the ground warms up to over 55 degrees. We usually buy about 20 packages of seeds, and we mix them all up. We throw the seeds down, and within a matter of 7 to 14 days, we start to have little zinnia plants coming up. So it's a very inexpensive way to add a lot of beauty and color to a garden. Nature is very humbling. She's always teaching us things. Did you know that the worldwide population of monarch butterflies has plummeted by 90% since 1992? Monarch butterflies are not only beautiful, but they're important pollinators. If you want to help them survive, plant milkweeds. Milkweeds are the only plants that monarch caterpillars eat. In fact, there's a substance in milkweeds that makes the monarch butterflies less tasty to hungry birds. So, try adding more native milkweeds in your garden and watch the butterflies arrive. Mary Startzman has loved gardening since childhood. When starting her own garden in Berea, she found inspiration in a gate she saw in the movie Barry Lyndon. Today, her backyard garden is an explosion of colors and textures, with surprises around every corner. Here we are at the very heart of Mary's garden. In fact, here's the gate that started it all 28 years ago. This is the entry to the heart, or the hearth in this case, of this garden. The fireplace is the center point, and all the rooms come out like spokes to a wheel.
My garden is pretty much divided into different, I would call them vistas, and they all have their own little special plants or their own special effects. They're all different, but they're all part of the one. That unites it from one room to the next to the next. The connecting element there is the fact that, of course, it's all the garden plants, but it's like going from one little microclimate to another little microclimate. It's all a nice little vista that you walk into and get to explore. The main start of practically the bulk of my garden was mail order, because you couldn't get hostas, or you couldn't get hydrangeas, or you couldn't get, they didn't carry them. And now, of course, you can find them in any store. When we bought this property here, it was all a blank slate, more or less. I wanted you to feel, when you came down the path and into the garden, that you were coming into a courtyard. And to have a courtyard, you got to have walls around it. I didn't want the typical fence, so I came up with the idea of using the cedar boards and making it curving. But then I didn't like the solidity of it, and I had those rings. I love rings. They come off a half barrel that had rotted, and so I would take chalk and we would play with where to put them. I love the way it just sort of hugs the interior of the garden. I already had a small in-ground pond, which is not very deep. It's only maybe 16 inches deep. I went to our local store, and they had little baby kois, and sure enough, I bought some, and I read about them, and they said the koi will grow in proportion to their environment. They didn't read that page, so they just kept growing, and all of a sudden, I knew that they were not going to be able to winter in 16 inches of water. So that's how the koi pond got to be. It's made a nice addition. It's got an arbor on top of it with flowering honeysuckle, and you can put pots around it, and so it's just enriched the garden. Being above ground actually is easier to maintain. The filters that you have to clean out, you only clean them out twice a year. It's got a skimmer box, and the skimmer box does have to be cleaned out maybe every 2 or 3 weeks, depends on how much food they're getting and what season it is. Even the main filters in the koi pond are not that hard to deal with. You just take them out and rinse them and put them back in. So I'll put out little metal tables on the hosta bed and put the bags of filter media on them and then rinse them so that the water and the nutrients get used. To me, they're kind of like the water-type butterflies. You have the butterflies that go in and out of the garden, through the gates and around, and you see them flitting around everywhere. And the koi do the same thing, but they do it in the water. From the small fish pond, you wander around to the side and go up to the tree house. It's just a lovely area to spend time up there, or if you want to go up there and survey and get a different feel for the garden, see it from a different perspective. You need to have a sitting area. So there is a sitting area right in the center of the garden that has a table and benches and a very nice stone fireplace. I love fire. I think fire is it's a fascination, I think, since the creation of time, you know, the cavemen discovering it. There are paths that wind around away from the fireplace and then circle back to the center of the garden. And there's also, from the rose garden near the house, there's a boardwalk that leads you into a nice-sized, secluded, I call it the side garden. It faces mostly northeast, so it's very shaded. It doesn't get a lot of sunlight. But there's enough light that you can grow some flowering shrubs like hydrangeas or viburnums. The art elements in the garden are kind of a anchoring focus point that helps the eye to rest on something that is not green, that is not flowering, and yet it adds another dimension of mystery or intrigue or beauty to the garden. I try to, you know, just keep it simple and have just a couple here and there. But I think all those things are important. It raises up the level of the garden, the water, the statues, the fireplace. I was at the rehab store one day. I thought, I'll go in there and see just what they have. And I was walking through the store, and they had these two very old bed springs. And they still had horsehair on them. I didn't even know they used horsehair on them. And I thought, what lovely coils that mattress has. It's near the tree house, so it sort of a barrier between the wilderness and the maintained garden. I love it in the evening when the sun is setting in the west and it shines through and lights up some of those coils. Those coils are wonderful. They're really lovely. I think they're lovely. I think they're interesting. Nothing was pre-planned. It was just a matter of feeling the flow. Don't do things in a straight line. Try to keep an air of mystery. Don't see everything at once. Because if you sit in one place and you can see the whole thing, all right, you saw it, you move on. But if you have a curving path, or you have a tree or that's blocking it, or something that's overflowing on a path, and it beckons you, and it's mystery, and you want to see what's on the other side. It wasn't a conscious effort of making rooms. It was just trying to make it interesting, mysterious, exciting. You want to go and investigate. Plants are very forgiving. They're going to come back. You can't kill them unless you really, really have to try hard to kill them. You prune whenever you have time, or transplant whenever you have time. Don't be afraid to try. Trial and error is your best teacher, more so than any book, I think. You'll remember it if you do it. And to me, that's probably the best secret of all.
Here we are in Mary Startzman's beautiful backyard garden. Now, mostly it's shade, but as you can see right here, this is a beautiful sunshiny spot, and she's taken advantage of it. She has beautiful Asiatic lilies, she's got daylilies, she's even got coneflower that's just about ready to flower. Stunning roses. This, in fact, she calls her rose garden. Blended in with the roses are black-eyed Susans. She's even got the climbing flowers that are native, the trumpet honeysuckle, beloved by hummingbirds. So if you have even the smallest spot of sunshine in your garden, take advantage of it. Plant daylilies or black-eyed Susans, even roses. Plant something that loves sun, that will bring you joy and color to your garden. Starting with just a patch of bad grass, Emery Schmidt and Jim Swearingen have transformed their Newport urban environment into a pocket garden, showing that big design ideas can work in small spaces.
I started in the toy business in the 70s and got a job with Kenner Toys. My claim to fame is I was the first designer of Star Wars toys. Being a toy designer and I guess being a garden designer is similar in we're looking for how you interact with what you're doing. So if it's a toy, it's the toy feature, the aesthetics of it. In the garden, it's similar.
Growing up on our farm in North Dakota, all of us children would help in the garden. Not only would we plant, we would help with the weeding, but we also were given a packet of our favorite flower seeds. that we could plant it, and we make sure we watered it and made sure it was growing fine.
People are coming into our garden. We take into effect how they're going to see it for the first time. We paved the garden path to be kind of a forced perspective. It makes it look longer than it really is.
To find other ideas would be mainly from traveling and seeing gardens, from friends' gardens.
We had a blank canvas. There was very little to worry about. So it was a process of, step by step. First the fence, then the paved area, and then the backyard where it's more the relaxing in the garden area.
The design things just happened by accident. As far as the maintenance, it would be a couple hours a week. Mainly your watering and your weeding where you need to. We are using a lot of perennials, so we don't have to continually plant the entire garden. We just add annuals for color.
I do get up early in the morning and water. And the maintenance, I'm not so much of a weeder, so it's probably good we have our preferences. I look at it aesthetically. Emery's down there in the detail in the weeds.
Overall, we enjoy working in the garden together, yes, but it's also a good time for each person to have their own space.
The plants change from time to time, and we've changed the way we use it a little bit.
One of the themes of the garden that I always wanted was to have a space that I could garden, but also entertain.
We've been looking at different ways to put plants on trellises. We're trying to get some color up high. We have hostas, and the textures, they provide, big broadleaf hostas, and the ferns have very fine looks to them. Coral bells come in an amazing array of things, and we've got different colors and different veining and things. And we look at that when we're putting it together, the different textures and the colors and trying to balance things out. The structures in the garden are really, some of it's from a practical point of view, like the fence, it's very economical material-wise. It's all done with 2x4s. We've actually thought about where we place pedestals to make sure that we have structure for things to stand on. We use ornaments in the garden, and they're really to draw your eye from one place to another. So the higher plants, the things on pedestals, draw your eye up from looking down. The sculptures tucked behind the plants allow you to look around and see something. They kind of give you some relief from just green and color. We don't have a lot of room, so we have to think about every little part of it.
When you are working in a smaller space garden, the main challenge I feel is to keep it balanced and a space that you can use.
The walls, they're not big, they just provide a visual break between the paved area to the more natural area.
The Japanese maple was planted about 20 years ago, and it was only a quarter of the size that it is now. And I really liked the idea of putting it in the corner just to balance the corner. Some of the interesting elements we love about our garden, for one thing, would be the mirrors that we put onto the sides and the rear portion of the garden. Not only does it make the space look larger, I can look into the mirror and see the whole length.
Emery's more of a flower person, and I'm probably more the cactus and succulents, and I'm experimenting. I'm learning more about them, how to propagate them, how to reroot them.
The water features that we have really do add a nice element to the garden. The water fountains provide a relaxing sound.
Gives us a little bit of natural sound against all the hard sounds of the city.
I wanted a raised bed for vegetables because in a small garden, you don't have room for it. So for the salad bowl is what I call it. This raised bed on the side of the house gets very hot afternoon sun from 1 p.m. until the sun goes down. And the brick wall really bounces the heat back, so it really gives it a microclimate.
Out front, we had just another grassy slope, which was dangerous to cut because it was so steep. So we've decided to terrace the garden and put the walls up. When I finally could sell the last lawnmower at the yard sale, it was like being released from torture from way back. We have sedums out front that are 40 years old. They were a gift to a former resident here, and they've been planted for 40 years, and we've been moving them around, and it's amazing that after 40 years you're still dealing with the same plants. There's no magic to gardening. It just happens. So just relax and have fun with it.
Also in Newport, just a few blocks away, Wes and Scott Ledyard have used found items, art, and a unique fountain to construct a colorful extension of their home.
The garden right now I would describe as pleasantly busy. So there are a number of things, and one of my favorite parts is to come out here and discover something new that my wife had planted that I didn't realize was there.
We moved here in December of 2007, and so the spring of 2008 was my first garden.
Well, it was basically kind of just a recessed pit. A lot of the backyards in Newport were known to have outhouses. So the soil is very sandy. You can't just put water on it all day long. It just goes right through it.
I think we maximized our space by creating levels, taking advantage of the fence, using a lot of vines, raising flower pots up on, some kind of a stand or level, and then just adding a lot of decor along with the flowers and plants. I have done some paintings in the garden. I painted the cellar doors with the birds on them, kind of lovingly ripped off from Charlie Harper. The pluses and minuses of planting in containers. I think you can have more levels when you plant in containers. You can actually have more variety when you plant in containers than in the ground. You can move them around if they need sunlight that they're not getting.
My favorite plant, I have to say, is one that I eat. So the herbs in the garden allow me to cook, which is one of my favorite pastimes, is to use them to make dinner, breakfast, you name it.
I use impatiens because they're so reliable. They never let me down. They will tolerate sun and shade. There's always flowers, and I love flowers. I love color.
The division of labor in the garden is pretty clear. If it involves hanging something, that was my job. So there are a number of items that are hung up on the walls, and I put them there with nails, screws, and whatnot.
The hardest part was confining my garden to a small space, but the easiest part was maintaining it. It's very manageable because of its size. I didn't really try to create a theme. A couple times when we've been on the garden walk, they would ask you, what is your theme? So one year I said it was birds, and hence we have a lot of bird houses and some rusty birds sitting around, but there's not really a theme anymore. Somebody gave me the idea of putting a watering can with ice cubes in it and hanging it on a crook or a tree. So that's what we call my poor man's water feature. One thing that we have that's unique in our garden is a fountain made out of a fire hydrant, and we give the credit to my husband Scott for installing that.
We have a water fountain that we made out of a fire hydrant. My son Corey and I were able to plumb it and pour concrete so that the concrete kind of looks like a city curb, and with an old grate that we had in the front of our house. Underneath it, we had to construct basically hidden wheelbarrow handles. So if we ever need to do any maintenance on it, we grab those handles and lift it up, and the whole thing will tilt up so we can get under there and fix it. the whole thing ended up weighing hundreds of pounds, and I got to pay a chiropractor for a couple of weeks thereafter to get my back in shape.
The things around here are just things I've picked up. They're for my own interest. The stained glass windows, we were on a bike ride in New Orleans, and it was shortly after the hurricane, so we call them our Katrina windows. They've got lights behind them so we can light them up at night. The frames came from a secondhand shop. We hung them up and put the flower pots in the middle of them. Most of it is stuff we've collected, mostly from Goodwill or yard sales or just walking down the alley. To a novice gardener, I would probably say, just experiment. Read the tags on the plants so you don't make any, real big mistakes, but if you see something you like, try it. I think in Newport here, we're kind of in a little climate zone, and we can get away with some things that maybe you can't if you're on the top of a hill in Cincinnati.
Look into a local garden club. For example, here in Newport, we have the East Row Garden Club, and there are people there that know way more than I do, and I encourage people to go to a club like that, and they'll learn a lot.
It's nice having a little garden in the backyard, someplace where you can go and get away from the urban situation, the buildings, the sidewalks. It kind of has a colonial feeling, like the old Spanish cities where everything from the street looks like buildings, but when you go in, there's like a beautiful little garden in the middle.
We have a weekly Wednesday night dinner with, we have 8 children, we have 9 grandchildren, and there's various other people, friends, and so on that come to visit us. So it's very nice to be able to have the garden area so that people can come out here and have a little bit of breathing room and just to kind of enjoy this small oasis-like feeling that we have in our garden.
Here's an easy way to attract more birds to your garden. Grow plants that produce seeds that birds love. Plants in the aster family are all good choices. For example, this Mexican sunflower. Other options are purple coneflower, black-eyed Susans, zinnias, and many more. And in late summer and early fall, don't cut back the dead flower heads. Instead, let your flowers go to seed and sit back and grab your binoculars. Dr. Marilyn McMillan of Eubank knew what she wanted in a garden, but didn't know how to bring her ideas to life. So she enlisted the help of landscape professional Gary Chittister, and the result is a series of garden rooms with inviting views and distinctive southern charm.
We wanted a formal area and an informal area, and just kind of arbitrarily put the formal area to the very back of the house and the informal area more to the side. Part of that was the way the land lays. This was open, and the part that's to the side has bigger trees, and there was a wet weather stream that ran through it. That was kind of out of necessity. The whole farm is 435 acres. What we call the yard is about 20 to 25 acres. Gary Chittister does the design work, and then his crew comes down and does the maintenance, and we have another maintenance guy who comes once a week in the summer and mows.
We were smart enough to know that we needed to keep the confusion separated, and that was keep the rustic part, and the formal part, the formal part. People ask me all the time, how much time you spend pulling weeds, and we don't. We spray it. You can't have something this big and be pulling weeds constantly. It just doesn't work that way.
The first thing that you generally notice is the alley. It's maples. It's been here 7 or 8 years. They've made a beautiful canopy that you can walk up.
We thank God for the Marmot maples. They are a very fast-growing maple. Neither Dr. McMillan or myself are spring chickens. And if we planned on seeing these trees touch, it was going to have to be something that was going to have to grow pretty quick. Because they grow so fast, the roots are on top of the ground. And that's part of the reason why we put the gravel path in here. We didn't want mowers and equipment running over those roots.
We have a lot of open space, and it could be almost intimidating, the amount of completely open space. I have to give credit for Gary for the idea of garden rooms. Each garden can stand on its own or be part of the other garden. I hope it gives you the feel of wanting to walk around the corner and see what's next. There's a statue of a Pan boy with a flute in the back garden. It's just situated perfectly. So I enjoy boxwood a lot. It's evergreen, but it's not needled. It's a broadleaf, and it has a shape that you can sculpt or leave natural, either one. And I'd always wanted a garden that you descended to. I'm not sure why particularly, just always an idea that appealed to me. Gary came up with the idea for the fountain.
When we got to the point where we realized that we had found the fountain, these folks negotiated. I asked, will you bring this fountain to Eubank, Kentucky? They said, yeah, sure. The day I met them here, they drove up and down Liberty Road 5 or 6 times thinking, okay, where's the park that this thing is going in? That was the first time they'd ever built that fountain in somebody's backyard.
The walkway up is designed to make you consciously slow down. It has curves, and it's slanted enough that you have to walk it fairly slowly.
It is very important to me that we direct people as to where we want them and how we want them to get there. But we want you to walk through that room that we have made to go up the hill. We had a nursery call us and say, Gary, we've got 300-foot rows of whips of dense Itaxis and burning bushes. We give them to you. We don't want to bulldoze them over. In 2 or 3 years, a burning bush can grow to be 4 foot tall. We kindly serpentined it around to kindly conform with the hill to where you weren't going straight up the hill.
You can look back and see the sunken garden at spots, or you can walk up to the pergola that's been here about 10 years. And it walks up to the cemetery, which is where my father is. Where we were able to put him, he can see his hills and he can see his cattle.
I tried to save the flowers for the pots, the colors for the pots, because there is such a big area here. I try to do as much as I can with bushes and trees and evergreens, just simply because that stays.
We have a fountain, bought it with the intent of it being a water fountain. Because of budgetary constraints, it was going to cost way too much running to run electricity and water to it. In all essence, it's a glorified flower pot. And I think it turned out beautifully. I absolutely love it.
Typically, we plant and we design around a structure. We will sit things around for a while until we feel comfortable that that's where they need to be.
I have a lot of connection to Gary's famous Urn from Hell because it's a Kentucky piece. It was built in the Louisville Foundry about 1840 and has been in the Lexington Cemetery at one point. It weighs about 850 pounds. I enjoyed watching him move it.
She's got a barn full of antiques and hardscape, and she likes for that to get rotated.
I've collected antiques since I literally was a child. I've always been sort of fascinated by history. Garden antiques are really nice because something that's even 10 or 15 years old gets a patination out in the garden pretty quickly, so it can be a little hard to tell age. Gary had the idea of making a secret garden. The idea is that you walk through, then the space opens up, and there's this place to sit.
We designed the secret garden around the fountain.
The fountain in the secret garden, I feel like we rescued it from Katrina. We got it out the spring before Katrina hit in the fall. It's French and was in New Orleans for years. It's probably from about 1750. I use the secret garden mostly just to kind of walk through. Even in the wintertime, you can sit back there if the sun is out. We go back there and just kind of enjoy being secluded a little bit. I hope that people realize that it was a labor of love. Not just on my part. There have been a lot of people that have put a lot of effort and time into it, and I'm very, very lucky to be able to enjoy their work.
Alan Bush gave his Mercer County farmland a second life by planting a natural meadow as a haven for animals and insects and a place of understated beauty.
The planting of a meadow or prairie is important. It can't be done on a very small scale. And homeowners can do it. I would really encourage them to try it. In the initial planting stages, I first wanted to test the soil to find out what the pH was. So you can get a pH test from the county extension agent in any county in Kentucky. And then I wanted to work with local Kentucky species. I knew I wanted to plant black-eyed Susan. I knew the ironweed would work their way in. I knew the goldenrod would work their way in. Then prepare the soil, actually kill down the weeds. Either, you can't cover a 2-acre plot with a tarp, but you either have to burn it down or kill down the existing growth, the turf that had been there. The drilling process, the seeding process, drilling the seeds into just sort of a very shallow groove, and then it takes off slowly. And first year you have to kind of mow a couple of times, 4 or 5 times at a height of about 15 inches or so, just to kind of kill down the annual weeds. And then the next year, one high mow in about the middle of May, and then let it go. And as a gardener, it was hard to sort of agree to those terms of letting it go. After the 3rd year, it built up enough leaf litter that we thought it would be interesting to burn, and it probably induces germination on some things that are just sort of lingering there that might require fire to actually germinate, or maybe even smoke ash. We had enough grass around the perimeter that the fire wasn't going to spread, and the woodlands were some distance away. What our meadow wants to do is just to go back to woodland. So there are alders coming up, there are walnuts, and so it just wants to go back to forest. So the fire doesn't kill those, so that's interesting. I mean, they're fire resistant, so you have to kind of deal with those and dig them out if need be. It might be useful to wait at least until maybe November, early December, before mowing or burning, because of nesting birds and other wildlife that might be in there. This year, I've done very little maintenance, except for sort of some spot pulling of a few weeds. The advantage for putting in a meadow, whether it's a 5x5 space or 2 acres or 25 acres, is that you're giving your soil a break and giving the land a break, because the land has been disturbed most everywhere, certainly in suburban neighborhoods and on our farm where it was farmed pretty intensively. One terrific benefit of a meadow or prairie is on the switchgrass and the big blue stem have very extensive roots that go down many feet into the soil. So they actually sequester carbon. And I think with global warming being a huge concern, I mean, it's certainly a helpful product to sort of suggest to homeowners that they try on a very small scale. Well, if you're thinking about planting a little meadow or prairie, I would encourage you to start small. I mean, you don't need acreage. I think you'll really enjoy seeing the butterflies wander in, the bees, the birds. I mean, it really is phenomenal.
I do that mainly for the kids.
One of the best ways to get ideas for your garden is to see what others have done. And one of the best ways to do that is to go on a garden tour, like this one from the Lexington Council Garden Clubs. Tours are opportunities to see wide varieties of gardens, large and small, formal and whimsical, and to meet other garden enthusiasts. Clubs across the state sponsor tours every year, and most gardeners are happy to share what they know. So check them out and see what's going on in your area. You'd never know that Joe Dietz and Tim Brooks's elegant Lexington garden is just feet away from a major expressway. Through their use of plantings, art, and stonework, they've managed to create an urban oasis around them.
These beautiful old trees are one of the reasons why Tim and Joe selected this site. The majestic silver maples and the elms anchor this beautiful garden.
We purchased the property in '92, and when we got it, there was really not much of a garden here. The people that had it before us had done a few things, but not much. So everything that you see here today is a lot different than it was 25 years ago.
Through those 25 years, the garden's changed drastically due to our desires of different plant material and Mother Nature's desires for weather. As a gardener, we all know we like to change things, move plants, and the Mother Nature part is something you deal with, and you embrace it because you can't do anything but. When you look at the house and the garden, it's sort of an eclectic mix of Frank Lloyd Wright's life. From the front of his more bungalow to the back with all the glass of his more mid-century modern. And that sort of moves on into the garden with some of the statuary, and then like the fire bowls or some of the bowls of plantings.
We are very close to New Circle Road. The basic thing that protects us from all the noise is a berm was placed there years ago, and there's quite a few trees on it now and shrubs, so that helps some. We have lots of plants in the front yard and the backyard. Those plantings help to suppress the noise that comes from New Circle. And as you go into the backyard, even more plants, and with the barrier of the house, you really don't hear it very much. We have our own oasis here, as we like to say, in the middle of the city.
The garden is more of a formal front yard with some eclectic aspects of stone walls, evergreen trees, lots of boxwood. The soil is very shallow out there because of the underlying bedrock. So we look for trees that have fibrous root systems, not large tap roots. So we've got some of the green giant arborvitaes that really do well, add a nice evergreen touch to the landscapes here in the bluegrass. The side garden along the driveway has really changed over the years. We basically opened it up to more of a sun garden, planting more bulbs. So in March, April, there's thousands of daffodils and various other spring bulbs that bloom in that area. It transitions then into later spring with the spring and summer perennials. And then toward the fall, you get the grasses and late summer flowers such as Rudbeckia and such that bloom. So you've got a 3-season various flowers that bloom in that area.
We like to have a vegetable garden. We tilled it up and put in a lot of nutrients and leaves and grasses and everything to enhance the soil. We've got lots of tomatoes and peppers and sugar snap peas, and a lot of fresh herbs. Then we'd walk into the courtyard, and the temperature drops about 10 degrees as you go in there.
From there, then you come into the bonsai display area.
I started playing with bonsai 20-some years ago and just got intrigued with it and liked working with them. When you start working on one of these trees, your mind loses everything else. You just want to work on that tree and try and make it look better. I've got a wide variety of evergreens and hardy trees and deciduous. I think I've got somewhere in the vicinity of about 40 to 45 pots, and in those pots I've probably got somewhere around 100 trees. There is a tremendous amount of maintenance in taking care of them. Many of them will need to be repotted, taken out of the pots they're in, the root systems clipped off and cleaned up, then resituated in a new pot. Along with that, there's a lot of trimming on the top to get everything in the shape you want. The branches need to be wired so they look the way that you want them to look. These pots have very little soil in them, and they can dry out very quickly, and you can lose your tree if you're not paying very close attention to that. They've got to be watered. You let them dry out, they're gone. There's also some trimming and pruning all year long, just so things look their best. It's not hard to get into. You can buy a boxwood or a taxus or something from one of the local garden centers and start playing with it and get a book and read up on it and get some ideas on what it entails and practice with it. We have decided to add on a conservatory, and we made it 2 stories, access from both levels.
It's mainly for orchids and other tropical plants. I've always loved the epiphytic nature of orchids and bromeliads. We also have some of the hardy pitcher plants. We located it on the west side of the house, which normally you wouldn't do because of the heat of the summer. But because of our large trees, they shade it and it stays fairly cool. There's over 25,000 species of orchids. No one can know how to grow every one of them, so I'm pulling my books out. I'm going to the internet. I've probably got 300 or 400 orchids here, probably 50 different varieties. So you've got to be careful that one that might like to stay dry versus one that needs a little mist every day aren't sitting next to each other or in the same part of the conservatory. You'll kill your orchids quicker keeping them too wet than you will too dry. In the winter, there's much less maintenance because you've closed it up, and it just basically recycles itself. Some days out here it'll actually rain in the conservatory because of just the humidity that builds up on the roof. And you need to be a little more careful because the high humidity, if you don't have enough air movement, then you'll get mold, mildew starting to grow.
We've got some birds and anoles and chameleons, and there's a lot of life out here.
The house sits above the floodplain. Instead of doing grass on the bank, we did stone walls and terraced it, various types of plantings, spring bulbs again underlying the plantings. And it was basically a way to keep from having a lot of maintenance on a hillside. But it also added different layers in the garden and a different visual from when you're in the back of the garden looking up toward the home itself.
And from there we'll walk down into the yard. We have a lot of different elements in the backyard, from the plants to the walkways to the walls to the statuaries. And one of the things we tried to do here was make it appear like there's many different rooms here. As you make one turn, you're in one room, and you go a few more steps and make another turn, you're in another room.
We've got a sort of kidney-shaped grass area. Basically, that lets your eye calm down as you move from room to room or vista to vista in the garden, seeing what's new or what you want to find out that's going on in this garden. It allows you just to have a moment to collect yourself before you move on.
And from there, we'll meander on down along the creek, and the temperature will drop another 10 degrees. So there are great variations in temperatures as you go from the different microclimates in our backyard.
From that point, you can view the back garden nearly in its entirety, seeing the lake in the distance, the creek that runs along the property. I've utilized native limestone and built numerous walls, paths. It just adds another layer, another texture to the garden, or as some people say during the winter, it provides you the winter bones for the garden. It's something to view while everything's asleep. I love art in the garden. I think you have to be careful on how much you use. You can get too busy. I think that the art needs to blend in with the garden. Most of the garden here, I see it in my head, and I get out and start doing the installation or the preparation with what I envision.
In the yard, I do a lot of the cutting and weeding and clipping, and he does a lot of the planting and designing and making sure that things are put in the right place.
With his forestry degrees, he knows trees. I've got a horticulture degree and landscape design degree. We both utilize our education in the garden along with many decades of experience. Because of the shade, because of all the leaf mold, leaf debris that breaks down, it can transform your soil to an acidic soil very quickly. And with that, you get moss growing, you can get the wild violets growing. I use a lot of pelletized limestone. apply it with a broadcast spreader. Like if you're going out doing fertilizer for your grass or whatever, you just buy the 30 or 40 pound bags of pelletized limestone. That works better. You can buy the limestone powder, but I find that the pellets work better. You can get it out into the garden without having it clump up a lot and having to deal with places where it might just want to make a white mess.
Some of the things that we've incorporated from around Kentucky is a lot of millstones. We've collected several of those in our travels and brought them back here. And in the backyard, we have one place where we've got 3 bubblers where the millstones are laid flat on rock, and then the hole in the center, which is the centerpiece, is water bubbling up.
And it's basically the dry bubble method where it bubbles out of the grindstone into a gravel area, so you don't have really open water, but you still have the water sound.
For a lot of people, if they're going to start doing a design like this, I think one of the critical things is getting some professional advice, someone that knows exactly how plants go together, how things should be laid out.
Know what type of home you're planning. Is this going to be your starter home and you're there a few years and going to move on? Or could this possibly be your life home? Plan it accordingly. Think of the plants that you like that may take a while to grow, get those started. Then think of how you will use the garden. Be prepared to always have your garden in flux and change. That's part of the joy.
Susan Bradley and Buzz Doherty turned an open pasture into a lush and peaceful garden that beckons you to stroll its pathways and make discoveries at every turn. From the multi-tiered waterfall to the miniature gardens that Susan creates, this rural hideaway is a beautiful experience on every scale.
When we first moved here, everything was pasture. We have about 2.5 acres under landscape. The property was fairly flat. I'd say we took some liberties with the ground to create more of what we wanted than what would have been just here if we'd have just used the flat landscape.
Buzz and I are totally different in the way we look at things. I see the big picture. I can see what it should look like eventually. Buzz can do anything that's possible to be building it. When we got the pergola, he built the model, and then he went and built the actual thing.
But underneath the pergola is the best spot in the garden to really get the sounds and the views. Some areas are raised and some areas are lowered, and there's some undulation in the topography. It enhances the view.
We've gone to a lot of botanical gardens around the United States, and we love the Asian ones. So we'll bring elements back, but not try to copy it.
We're not nearly as formal as most Japanese gardens are as far as keeping some of the trees pruned a certain way and into certain shapes and forms.
Right now, the fish swimming through the grass bed is my favorite, just because it's new and it was a lot of fun to create. And it is fish that are swimming in grass. But then, of course, to go along with that is a tree that Buzz cut down most of it, and then with leaves from home shows, we built a palm tree. We don't do anything invasive. If it's an invasive species, we won't plant it.
We started off wanting to have a conifer-based garden. We buy them as little sprigs and start them off in the greenhouse, and then when they get big enough, we move them up into the garden, see how they do.
And that worked well until we got too much shade in this garden. And then we've had problems with some of them drying out, others having to be moved somewhere else. We have a sink or swim attitude. If it dies, it dies. If something's struggling, I will take it out and take it to the greenhouse and then put it somewhere else. But if it dies, we have a great compost pile.
I think Susan managed to come up with a lot of good, different colors, different textures that have done fairly well here.
We do use as much color as possible. I almost always have a red and a yellow and a blue in every bed. I use it with conifers. We don't really have perennials. The only thing we have perennial-wise are hostas. You don't design the bed, you design the grass around it. The beds have not changed as far as shape, but what's gone into them has changed a lot when things have died or the trees have gone from full sun to full shade.
It's amazing that some of them that we have that are fairly good size now started out as small as they did.
And for at least 3 or 4 years, all it was getting the ponds together, getting the boulders around it. That's a 100-foot liner from the top to the bottom. So that was put in place, and then putting the rocks in it. And then the next step was putting the dirt around it so that you could actually form the beds, and then putting the trees in. This place wasn't anything to look at for at least 12 years.
The pond is the main feature of our landscape. Everything kind of revolves around that. As we moved out and you get away from the pond, it became a little bit different type of landscape.
It's a moving, living thing. The waterfall itself, we don't do much with it. We'll get moss on it periodically. As far as the placement of the waterfall, that waterfall comes down the retaining wall of the existing property, so it has a 3 feet or 4 foot natural drop. But the stream itself, that shifts quite a bit. We put the rocks in first, then we go back and move them to make the most noise.
The farmer who lived next door to us was kind enough to let us collect almost all the rocks that you see around the pond. And it takes several attempts to place the rocks where you think they should be. And when we finally get it right, then move on to the next rock.
We had feeder fish that we bought at one of the local stores. Unbeknownst to me, I thought they were all goldfish, and one of them turned out to be a koi. And he's very distinctive. He's not pretty, but he's at least 25 years old, and he has a black spot on his side, and he's completely white, but he's the original koi for us.
The size of your pond determines how many fish you can really keep, and we've pretty much established the size of their population.
Having a big pond has definitely helped in the cleanup of it and the funness of the fish.
For whatever reason, and we're not the cause of it, there are fish in the upper pond when there didn't start to be.
They went up through the filtration system. We can see them growing up there, and then there's 5 or 6 giant koi up there that we didn't put there.
Susan's miniature gardens are something that she's taken up in the last couple of years. The only thing that I do is construct the pots for her to put her gardens in.
One of the big problems with the miniatures is moving them. You have to have a large type of pot so that you can have a scene, but you don't want that much dirt. So what Buzz did is he took styrofoam blue board or insulation board, and he built a cross piece, and then he went up higher so that there's only 5 inches of dirt in those pots. You want to hamper the growth of all your miniatures. So when you don't let them have all that room for their roots, then you have the tree that you have that's 2 feet tall and has been there for 3 or 4 years. I used to use styrofoam peanuts. I didn't know they had gone to biodegradable peanuts. So the first 3 or 4 miniatures kind of shrunk. Every time I watered, they just kept going down and down. So it finally dawned on us that, okay, these must not be working right. And it took us forever to figure out what was wrong with those. The last thing we had done before the miniature gardens is what we call the zoo. It's back on the other side of the property, and we had a tree that came down. It was a weeping willow, and it was huge, and I asked my husband, leave the trunk there. So it has about a 25-foot trunk, and we put a life-size lion in the top of the tree. And that led to other zoo animals. And now it was a joke to see how many different ones we can get in there and hide from people. There's a 6-foot-long panther that took my husband 6 weeks to find when we put that in the garden because you didn't see it. It was well hidden. And now there's a lot of different fun stuff in there, and we have people coming back just to see what's in the zoo now. I walked the dogs at night. That was part of my job. So I would be out there at night with the flashlight, and I would be thinking, oh, this is what I should do here. That should go this way. So I would end up creating the actual beds and the structure of the bed in the middle of the night.
This is a garden that we have done completely on our own. Susan designed everything. We planted everything. We moved almost all the rocks ourselves. All the work is worth the effort when you get a chance to stand and look at it or share it with other people. It's also very exciting to see how everything grows. Can't believe how stuff grows.
It's a shame to not share it with somebody. No garden is ever finished. They're all changing. That's one thing about a garden. It's a living and breathing thing. It always changes. I think my favorite quote ever is to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow.
As we've seen, you don't have to have a large crew of landscapers to create an amazing and impressive landscape. For the novice gardener, move one rock at a time. Plant one tree, shrub, or flower, and before you know it, you'll have a backyard paradise all your own. When Steve Humphrey and his wife, novelist Sue Grafton, found their Louisville estate, Lincliff, the gardens had long been neglected. But they saw the potential that was hidden behind the weeds, and over a decade lovingly restored the property to its original grandeur, adding new treasures along the way.
When we bought this property, which was probably 1999, it took us 6 months to work out the details. The gardens had been neglected for 17 or 18 years.
So the first thing I wanted to do when I finally ended up moving into the place and started working on it was try to find what the gardens must have looked like. The site plan and some of the big trees and the hardscape was designed by John Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted's nephew, and a member of the Olmsted Group. And then in the late 30s, the Crawford family hired a very highly regarded and well-known landscape architect named Bryant Fleming. And he, I think, built the fountain, and he put in the boxwood garden. What I tried to do is carve into the stuff that had been overgrown and allowed to go to disarray, and to see what it would have looked like and bring it back to at least that original design.
Originally in the front we had these overgrown bushes. I don't even remember what they were called, but it was just clumpy and obnoxious, and clearing that out was a big help.
If there is a theme, it would be man's dominion over nature. I like to show that I can plant and grow things to suit me rather than to suit somebody else or something else.
It's nice to have a garden that looks like it was there all along. You don't want your effort to show too much. If you do it cleverly, it looks like it's always been that way. The best part of the garden from my perspective is watching it develop. At first it's just a mess, you know, it's hardscape and digging and clearing. And so the little plants go in and they're so tiny, you know, and they look so pitiful. And next thing you know, they're growing, they're developing, they're relating to one another, and they have to get down and trim it all up so it'll look civilized.
Most formal gardens traditionally have statuary. I've got the statue of David in the style of Bernini. It's made out of Italian limestone. It dates back to about 1880. It was allegedly in the garden of Sir John Gielgud and was sold when his estate was disposed of. Things like that require a large space so you can see it from a good distance. and it was in 3 pieces. And we could only get as close as the driveway. And a guy with a crane had to come in. So we had to take this crane and send it out 70 feet and then set it down in place and then put the next one on top of that. We were very nervous about that because we could just see David toppling and breaking. And I created that arbor, and it's got plants growing over it. So you can't really see until you get to the end of the arbor, and then your eye is drawn to the right, and there's the fountain. Over the years, a lot of tree stuff had fallen into it, leaves and needles and stuff. It was 12 inches deep of dirt. And I got out there with my shovel and wheelbarrow and cleaned it out, one course of the fountain at a time.
The fountain, which probably had not worked for 20 years, they dismantled it, labeled all the stones, laid them out on the grass. We replumbed, we did new electrical, and then they put it all back together again.
And then there's a pond with water plants and stuff in that fountain. And then I've got some other plants and hedges and azaleas and things around there. And then I've got a fernery in front of that.
It's lovely to have it up and running, you know. I'm a big believer if you've got a fountain, it ought to be pushing water out.
Whereas the fountain garden is shady, the boxwood garden is very sunny. And it's got statuary in there, it's got very formal hedges.
The boxwood garden was all grown together. You could scarcely walk single file, and everything was dead, everything was neglected.
In the boxwood garden, there's the statue of Pan and a little nymph, and that was here when I got here. But having seen that, I thought, aha, statuary. So then I got the 4 statues in the boxwood garden representing spring, summer, winter, and fall. And under each one, I've planted things that will flower in the appropriate colors. So I've got oranges and yellows under autumn, and reds and bright yellows under summer, and pastels under spring, and then all white flowers under winter. They're fairly old. They're very heavy. And it was funny, when we put them in there, we had to dig a big hole and fill it with concrete and rebar so that we could have a base for those statues to stand on and not tip over. And then we started planting and designing the knot gardens around the statuary.
Steve developed all of the knot gardens on his computer. So we planted them so they look like they grow in and out. I can see the history in it, and I can see how it's been redeemed and brought back to life, and that's always lovely. When people come out that path and turn and look at the boxwood garden, they're always astonished.
I started thinking, okay, I've gotten it back to what it might have looked like and what the original bones were. Now it's time to start adding things. And I started designing elements. So I'm always looking for things to work into my design.
When we travel now, we always go to gardens and look and see what others have done. Steve always takes a camera. He always comes away with some new scheme afoot. It keeps it moving so that it doesn't get static. And I think every time you come up here, there's something new to appreciate.
I've never had any formal training, but a lot of information is available online. The only design principle that I've ever really learned is to try to create rooms in the garden so that each section of the garden is complete unto itself. And also I try to make it a surprise. So when you travel from one garden to another, all of a sudden you turn a corner and you go, wow, look at that. And it's a simple idea, but you'd have to have some space in order to do it. And so this has been a real joy to have the kind of space and the kind of room and the kind of structure that was here. All the hardscape was here. All I had to do is fill in the gaps.
My husband, Steve, is very passionate about this property, and his love is the whole process. I'm a perfect audience for a good garden as it grows and changes, and that I feel is my role.
As you turn right out of the boxwood garden, along the wall is what I call my English border garden, and I've seen this in many places where you have a staggered planting of flowers that flower at various times during the year, and it's very densely planted, and it's often butterfly attractants and stuff. And then you go through that, and then it's a completely different garden. It's just all zoysia grass, and in the middle of the zoysia grass, I've done an in-ground sculpture, a design, where we've carved out channels and lined them with aluminum. And then we put different colored rocks in there. We had to get my laser level out. We had to make sure that everything was exactly square, because if it was slightly off, you'd see it. So everything had to be exactly centered and exactly square. What I like here is the simplicity. There's a nice open space of this zoysia grass. I wanted something that I could keep fairly low and keep those channels and those designs visible. And the zoysia has done really well. It goes dormant in the fall and winter, but boy, in the summertime, it cranks. And then below that, there's a hedge of Blue Point juniper. And so you can't really see over it, but then you go down the steps and around it, and what used to be the tennis court, I've turned into my fragrance garden. Everything in there is fragrant, either to touch or by bloom.
I love the popcorn plant that Steve put in. You run your fingers along the leaves and it smells like buttered popcorn. I mean, how can that be out in nature? It's amazing.
And it's a garden unto itself. And when you're in it, you can't really see any of the other gardens. You explore things, you try things, you hear about things, you see things. You think, I wonder, could I grow that here? Is there any reason why I couldn't? Let me try. I experiment with things and try things. And if something doesn't work, I'll try moving it. And if that doesn't work, then I'll pitch it, try something else. But, I give it at least 2 chances.
It's just fun to see new things go in and watch them struggle and watch them prevail.
And I built a maze. Every boy needs a maze. But I designed it on my computer, and we planted 525 Blue Point junipers. And I had lined everything up with paint lines on the ground, again with my lasers and stuff, so everything's perfectly square. And as I went down, I had dots where I wanted to plant these things, and I would drop my auger bit down in there, dig a hole. Someone would come after me, take a plant out of the pot, put it in there. Someone would come after him and put the dirt in. We planted this in about a day and a half. And then after they grew up, I realized that I had made a mistake with the design, and I had to alter the design. Some of it involved moving or taking plants out, but some of it required adding something. I had a section of the garden where it was natural to go one way, and you would skip a third of the maze. No one would ever go to that part of the maze. So I had an old door that came off one of the cottages here, and I painted it bright colors, interesting colors, and then I just stuck it in the ground, attached to some posts, and it's got a window in it. People get to the door and they realize they want to go through it, but it won't open. So they're sitting there rattling at the door trying to get through it, and they can't get through it. And then when you come on the other side, we see where the door is, and it's actually there so that people can't take a shortcut through the maze. I also put a lot of little tchotchkes in there, skeletons and Bigfoot and little statuary in my garden. So you come around a corner, there's a chicken, or a rusty horse, And so I put a lot of stuff like that in there. That's kind of fun. I'm trying to make this garden as low maintenance as possible. I can't claim to be an organic gardener, so I rely on chemicals quite a bit. We found a lot of pre-emergent weed control that we put down in areas just to try to keep the weeds down, because if we had to hand weed this place, we would never get it done. There are all kinds of plants that they claim are deer resistant that aren't. The deer eat a lot of things that I'm thinking, why are you eating that? All it does is motivate us to have secure areas that the deer can't get in. The previous owners, they had 12 people working on the grounds. We have 3, myself and 2 people. But we have hydraulic machinery, we have gas engines, and we have chemicals. Between those things, we're able to kind of keep things under control. The fragrance garden is the last garden I've created, and I think we're done creating gardens because I think we've reached the limit of what we can maintain.
It was a slow process along with the interior of the house. We took 10 years to put this together.
I'm concerned about my legacy. I've never had a canvas like this upon which to express myself with my lust and for gardening and for plants. The idea that somebody would come along, subdivide the house, and bulldoze all my gardens just drives me insane. My challenge is to figure out how I can keep this place intact. There are a couple ways to do that, and I'm going to explore some of those to see if there's a way that I can take this work of art that I've tried to create and see if I can't preserve it for the future.
Thank you for joining me as we visited some of Kentucky's amazing secret gardens. As you've seen, gardens come in many sizes and styles. I hope you've come away with a few exciting ideas to apply in your own garden spot. To get started, use your imagination and just dig in. But keep in mind, gardens are more than living works of art. They're meant to be lived in, enjoyed, and shared with others. Happy gardening!